Welcome to the World of Eora, a news and lore podcast about the Pillars of Eternity games, as well as Obsidian Entertainment's upcoming release, Avowed. Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of the World of Eora. I'm your host Eric, aka Gingerino. Thank you so much for joining me on another episode as we dive into the lore, history, and game mechanics for the Pillars of Eternity games as we gear up for the release of Avowed. For those wondering why we pair those games together, it's because Avowed and Pillars of Eternity, they share the same fantasy setting known as Eora. So, as the theory goes, if we look into the Pillars of Eternity games and we can glean some insights as Avowed undergoes development, we can speculate what the game might be like or what might be in there or where it'll be, etc., etc. As well, it just gives us a chance to geek out for those of us who love the Pillars of Eternity games and the worlds that are created over at Obsidian Entertainment. I've been excited to do this episode for a while because it is to do an episode about one of the deities of the world is a little bit more of an undertaking, not because it's hard by any means, but because there's just a lot more information to sift through, and it's important to try to figure out what's important to transmit as data to people who are listening to the show who might be new to Pillars of Eternity or have been playing the game forever, and people who are just excited for Avowed. So it takes a little bit more time to do that, and I'm happy to finally be able to get an episode like this out. Thank you for your patience for those who've been listening to the last few episodes. I've been a little tardy in the releases, and the episodes have been a little shorter just because of the new baby around. And but yeah. I got him down and sleeping, so I'm able to record this episode. I had to peel myself away from his cute little sleeping face, but anyways, you're not here to listen to me talk about that. Today, we're going to be talking about the goddess Ondra, one of the 11 deities that are in the fantasy world of Eora. There's not really much news to cover regarding Avowed or Pillars of Eternity. However, one piece of information is that a very talented writer and narrative designer over at Obsidian has stepped down from the team to pursue her own goals. And that would be Kate Dollarhide. She's the lead narrative designer for, I believe, the project of Avowed, possibly even the Outer Worlds 2, and she has stepped down to pursue her own goals. The separation from Obsidian seems amicable. It doesn't seem like there's any hostility there. It just seems like she's wanting to move on to other things. And, that's super awesome. The work that she has done at Obsidian, everybody loves the stuff that she does. She's very talented. I like the things that she does, and I'm excited to see where she goes and what she does with this. I know some people are concerned what this means for Avowed or what it means for Obsidian. Like, is this a huge problem? Is Avowed going to be put on hold? Or is there going to be some dissonance between what was written before and what's going to be written after? I personally wouldn't worry too much about it. I don't think Kate is the type of person to just leave a project high and dry without having set up something so that it can succeed without her there. But also, there is a team of professionals working on this game, and they've been all involved in creative endeavors before, so I'm not terribly worried about their ability to handle it. Is this a blow? Yes, but they will replace her with someone else who is going to bring something new and creative to the team that might add to the game as well. So I would encourage anyone out there to, instead of focusing on worrying about what Kate's absence is going to mean for the game, instead be hopeful about the person who's coming in on what they can contribute to the game. Because, who knows what the mixture of those two writers having helped out with the narrative design will do for this game. So I, for one, personally am excited. That's the only thing newsworthy I would say of late to mention regarding Avowed. So with that all said, let's dive into today's lore.
I'm curious. What exactly did you find there?
So if you're playing Pillars of Eternity 1, you'll hear the goddess referred to as Ondra, Ondra. And if you were playing Pillars of Eternity 2, you'll hear that same name as well, but you'll also hear the alternative name, Ngati, which is the name for the same god by the Huana culture. So depending on what culture you're in the world of Eora will determine whether or not a god is called the same thing. We've covered this before when talking about the goddess Berith, the goddess of death, how she has different names depending on what culture you're talking to. So for Ondra, the goddess we're talking about today, we have Ondra and Ngati. Those are the main two names. Other aliases that she goes by are the Lady of Lament, the Salty Wench, and the Sea Vault. I can't remember exactly where that one comes from. Ondra is the goddess of several things, particularly oceans, seas, forgotten places and things, loss, mourning, the tide, relentlessness, and I believe the moon as well. When you talk to Ondra in Pillars of Eternity 2, you get to see kind of the visual representation of what Ondra looked like. And she's quite the sight to behold. I think there's a reason that if Ondra is ever around in the world of Eora, she's hidden way below the sea because she's a scary-looking beast. She's got the head of what would look like one of those anglerfish. She even has that little dangly antenna that has a glowy bit at the end of it. The anglerfish is being that really, really freaky fish way down deep in the ocean, in the dark, dark places of the ocean where you need specialized equipment to go down because of the water pressure. It's got those hollow white eyes, just these big white glowing eyes, and it's got these jagged teeth. They're like exaggeratingly big teeth, they just kind of clasp over each other, and they're the ones that have that little glowy orb that floats in front of them that they can kind of distract prey with. That's the head of Ondra. Now, the torso of Ondra has got kind of it looks kind of like a humanoid form with, arms and a torso and all that, but obviously it has a little more fish-like in texture is what it looks like. And when you're talking to Ondra as well, you can see 4 of what I'm assuming are multiple breasts just hanging out and about for you to look at. So that's super fun. Yeah, Ondra's kind of one of the scarier-looking deities if you were to run into their Titanic form. One interesting thing about Ondra is that she is one of the gods that people historically didn't really talk to that much. She's not really known to speak to many people, which is why it's kind of a big deal if you're paying attention to the lore. In Pillars of Eternity 2, you're able to actually talk to Ondra through one of your companions. You kind of use your watcher abilities, and you are able to kind of, in a way, commune with her, or at least hear words from her through this other person. And it's kind of a big deal because she doesn't really talk to people that much. As well, you can talk to her in Pillars of Eternity 1 through some DLC. There's an interaction where you can talk to the hair of Ondra, which is just these towers of water that are kind of holding its shape, talking to you. I won't get into the whole quest of where they're involved, and I'll let you explore that for yourself. But there are moments where you, the watcher, get to talk to the goddess of Ondra, and that is a big deal because she is never known to speak to people. In fact, she's not even really seen that often. Now, I said that Ondra is the goddess of the moon, and I guess that's not entirely accurate. She's not the goddess of the moon necessarily, but Ondra is obsessed with the moon. She constantly is wanting to reach it. In fact, there is historical legend that Ondra has always attempted to touch the moon and grab a piece of it, and that led to kind of a cataclysm in the history of Eora, which we'll get into later. Now, like all of the deities in the world of Eora, Ondra has an associative godlike type of people. For those of you who are not familiar with the godlike are one of the races of people. So in Eora, you have races like humans, elves, and dwarves, and then a few original races developed for this fantasy world. One of those races is the godlike. The closest analog I can think to is if you're into Dungeons and Dragons, they're kind of like a tiefling would be. That's kind of like, I would say divinely touched, but I guess in D&D it's more infernally touched. The godlike are creatures that are born to regular parents, so like human parents, elven parents, etc., etc., but one of the deities of the world, quote unquote, blessed the baby when it was in utero, and they are born as one of these godlike creations. The thing that kind of sets the godlike apart is that they share resemblance to their parentage. So if they have elven parents, they'll kind of grow with the same form, a little tall and a little lanky. But their physical appearance, their physiology will be completely different. And it will match the attributes of the god that they are like. So in the case of, say, a nature godlike, which models after Galawain, they might have moss growing instead of hair. They might have fungus growing off of their body. They could have antlers at the top of their head. They could have, wood for skin, stuff like that. Things that would mimic what the god is like. In the case of Ondra, it's rather interesting because up to the point of Pillars of Eternity 2, it's been kind of assumed that there is one type of godlike for one god. So for the instance, I talked about the nature godlike with Galawain, and then there was the death godlike to Bereth, and there's the fire godlike to Magrin, right? And in Pillars of Eternity 1, we see a moon godlike, which we associate to Ondra. But then in Pillars of Eternity 2, we see that there is also a marine godlike, and that is also attributed to Ondra. So this opens up the door to there being more than one type of godlike for each of the gods. And that kind of makes sense, really, when you think about it. From a lore perspective, I think each of the godlike are supposed to be unique. Like they're an entire race and class of people, but each person looks completely different, They can have completely different physiological traits, but each one is associated to one god. So it's good to see because this kind of confirms that each god can have a multiplicity of types of godlike. For gamey purposes, the two that we run into are moon godlike and marine godlike. Moon godlike has got this like pale blue skin and white eyes, and it's got like a halo instead of horns. It's got like a halo floating above its head. It kind of looks like a crescent moon. And it's one of the more approachable types of godlike, I would say. You know, a fire godlike, it looks like a person's skin is made of lava and that there are sparks bursting forward and they got kind of demon horns. It's a little creepy to walk up upon. Death godlike, you never want to run into them in a dark alleyway. They look like a bunch of cancerous insects is growing off their face. But a moon godlike, it looks approachable. But still, I would say a little bit freaky. It's unknown, right? And I think it's the detachment with the eyes. The eyes don't really have any color to them; they're just sort of white. And then the marine godlike, they tend to have very a fish-like, watery skin. And in the case of the marine godlike that you run into for Pillars of Eternity 2, which is a companion by the name of Takehu, instead of hair, he's got like these like anemone type danglies where the hair would be. And they kind of look like water as well. They're bluish. It almost looks like strands of water that is maintaining its shape, as well as things like gills that could be on a creature. There could be webbing on a creature as well. So it really depends on the marine godlike you're talking to. So those are the two types. That we don't run into any priests of Ondra in the games. Within the games, there are certain classes you can play, and in something like Dungeons and Dragons, you can play a class known as cleric, and in the World of Eora, the analog to that would be a priest character. Now, you're only able to select one of 5 or 6 types of priests, so you're only able to follow certain gods in the Pillars of Eternity games. Now, there should be priests of Ondra running about, but you can't play them specifically in the game. Now, priests of Ondra, you could very easily attribute to these people called gift bringers, who we'll talk about in a little bit when we go over more of the religious stuff of Ondra. But for now, let's take a step back and talk about Ondra's history. So going to the Pillars of Eternity Collector's Book, which if you have the definitive edition of Pillars of Eternity on your PC, you can access this digitally if you don't have the hardback cover version when the game was in its Kickstarter phase. You can go to the deity section and we can talk about the goddess Ondra there. We can see what the official lore is, the official write-up from Obsidian themselves, and this is what we have written. Ondra is a melancholy and mournful goddess who, legends say, was once in love with the moon. She is the ruler of all seas and oceans, and is venerated by sailors, fishermen, those who live near the shore, and those who mourn loss, especially lost love. And this will tie in a little later as we talk about the history of Ondra. Legends of Ondra are old compared to many legends of other gods. Stories of her romance with the moon can be found in several cultures around the world. In these stories, Ondra falls in love with the moon, but is ignored. She pursues the moon and attempts to touch it, causing part of it to fall into her, losing its glow as it descends into her depths. Her depths being the oceans, obviously. The event causes horrible catastrophes all over the world. Despite this, legends say Ondra still continues to pursue her love. People believe that the tide are her perpetual pursuits of the remaining moon. Tidal waves, tsunamis, and similar catastrophes are the results of her more aggressive attempts. So a lot of this is mythological so far in sense. It talks about how Ondra loves the moon and reached for it and broke a piece of it off, and then it fell into the ocean, and she's still trying to grab the rest of it, and that's where tidal waves come from, right? So it kind of is a mythological description of why tidal waves and tsunamis and all that kind of happen. And it also is tied towards things like loss and longing and love, which I think that anyone living close to the ocean, or like a culture of people that have to survive off of scavenging things in the ocean or finding fish in the ocean, that can be a pretty devastating place to live in. So I'm sure loss is something that's familiar to societies and groups of people living in that area of the world. And so perhaps this is a reason that a god like Ondra is attractive to them. And that's where these legends might come from. In legends, Ondra is one of the few deities that do not take a physical form. In rare cases where she exerts her influence, it is felt through the water or in its inhabitants. Now, earlier on, I gave a quote-unquote physical description of Ondra, and I don't know if I clarified or not. In Pillars of Eternity 2, you do talk to Ondra, and you do see this form, the one with the anglerfish head and the body and all that, but that is primarily taking place in a vision. And so this is kind of what the vision that she is projecting of herself in that particular sense. So that's not her in a physical form, well, at least that we know of, just from that interaction. She is also never known to speak. She is popularly imagined as a goddess who listens and accepts without judgment or reply. As such, many use her, via the ocean or the sea, as a confessional for feelings they cannot otherwise express. This is important for people, I think. It's really important for people to feel like they have a safe place where they can actually go talk to someone if they believe that Ondra exists and that Ondra does hear them and that she accepts what they have to say. It's important, I think, for people to be able to talk things out with what they believe is someone listening to them. And so I think this is why Ondra tends to be looked at in a little more of a favorable sense, because so far she's kind of a place for people to bring their remorse and their mourning and their grief to. As such, many use her via the ocean sea as confessional for feelings they cannot otherwise express. People also drop objects into the ocean or sea, including bodies, others or their own, to forget about them, believing that Ondra will hold them in the darkness with her piece of the moon. Ondra's gift bearers are groups of men and women who collect donations of trinkets, love notes, and other objects from people who live far inland in exchange for a small fee. The gift bearers take these objects to the ocean or sea and ceremonially drop them in a particularly deep spot. So this ties into something we just read. So we read here that people who believe in Ondra are followers of Ondra, Ondrites, as I believe they're called, in order to help process their grief or their mourning for their losses, they will take important objects and they will drop them into the ocean. The idea being that Ondra will hold on to those objects and help them to be forgotten of. So if you have someone in your life that you've lost, you will take a object of value that keeps reminding you of them and keeps bringing that grief back up. You take this to the ocean, you go to a deep place and you toss it into the ocean. And this is one way, obviously, for you to be letting go of the grief, but it is also a ritual by which you are giving this grief to Ondra, and then she will hold on to that grief in the depths of the ocean where it cannot escape and get back to you, kind of thing, right? So it's a way of processing your own emotions, but it's also a ritual by which you kind of show your fealty to Ondra, that you give your sadness to your god. Now, what the problem will be is that what if you're a follower of Ondra's faith and you want to do this ritual to practice that, it's part of your religion, it's part of your faith, but you live too far away from an ocean. I suppose you could drop it in a lake, but, depending on the lake, you could probably go back and get the thing if you tried hard enough. And a lake, you can usually see an entire lake. And so you might go and look at that lake and then remember, the thing that I threw is in that lake. And so you're really not forgetting anything, right? Because I know that I have a lake near where I live, and if I threw something in there of great value, every time I see that lake, I would be reminded of it. Whereas the ocean, it's so vast, it's so massive. I feel like it would be harder to remember that because there's so much there. And I would see the ocean from a variety of angles. That's just a thought that pops in my head. I don't know if that's actually true or how it would work out, but either way, there's still a problem there. So what does an Ondrite do who wants to perform this ritual but doesn't live close to the ocean? Well, there are religious followers of Ondra called gift bearers. And what these gift bearers do is they take these trinkets and notes and objects and what have you, and they charge a small fee because they have to travel back and forth between the inland and the ocean. And they take these objects and they bring them to the ocean and they perform this ritual for you. In a sense, it's almost even better because not only are you not going to associate a spot on the shoreline to where you threw this object into the sea, but you don't even know where in the sea it was dropped. So you truly are letting it go to Ondra in that sense. So in a way, it's almost better if you're really trying to perform that ritual and forget the mourning and loss that you have. There have been historical cases of gift bearers, or people posing as them, abusing their responsibility, either by pawning the gifts they are given or by reading the contents of notes and diaries people give them and using them for blackmailing purposes. As a result, in some areas, gift bearers are mistrusted or even attacked by suspicious locals. This was the first thing that popped into mind for me when I found out about gift bearers and who they were in the lore for the world. You really get introduced to them a little bit more in the White March DLC for Pillars of Eternity 1. You can get introduced to them earlier, but they're a little more heavy-handed on the lore in that one. So if you're interested in it, play that DLC, you'll hear about them a little more. But the first thing that popped in my head was like, okay, so I give this guy something that's incredibly valuable but is causing me a lot of grief to a gift bearer, and he's just going to take my $25 I've paid him and just go to the ocean and throw it in. How do I know that he actually did the thing? How do I know he didn't just take my $25, also hit a pawn shop on the way out, get more money for the thing, and then keep on going, right? How do you know? And then the other side of that too, though, is like, even though that feels wrong, why is it wrong? Because if the point of me giving this thing away is for it to be thrown to the ocean, shouldn't this person just use it for their own good anyways? Like, hey, here's $25 for you to do your thing. Also, hey, now you've able to pawn it and make more money. Why is it feels bad? And I think it's because it's deceitful. I'm giving this person my money for them to do a specific thing that's related to my faith, which is incredibly intimate and personal to me, and they are using it for their own gain and their own benefit. I think that's why it feels wrong. Even though I think if you look at it objectively, it's like, well, where's the harm, Which is why I think it's really easy to be a gift bearer and become corrupt, or it's really enticing to pose as a gift bearer and get things for free. And then as well, this thing like, throwing a diary into the ocean, but that has really personal information to you that could be used against you for blackmail. There's got to be some sort of regulatory service for these gift bearers. There needs to be a government regulation thing. So you got to be a certified gift bearer if you're going to be able to pose as one. I don't know, but there's definitely a lot of trust that goes into using a gift bearer if you live inland. And because people do this so often where they misuse the title or they pose with this title, people are often mistrusted or even attacked. But going back to the idea of Ondra having gift bearers, it might add a little nuance now to a location in the Defiance Bay region. If you've played Pillars of Eternity 1, you know that you can go to the city of Defiance Bay as part of the story, and Defiance Bay is set up into different districts. There's First Fires, there's Copper Lane, and then there's this one location in that city called Ondra's Gift. And now that area of the city might make a little more sense to you now of like why it's called Ondra's Gift and the stories behind that location of the city. That part of the city was, I believe, destroyed as part of a war in the history of the world. And the fact that it's called Ondra's Gift now, I think is reminiscent of how the people there feel about how some of them feel like they're forgotten. They're just tossed aside. And that's where, if you wander around, you can see a lot of the poor and a lot of vagrants hanging around in that area. And it being called Ondra's Gift, it was reminiscent of that. So now I'd like to move on to what I would call scripture of Ondra worshippers. And this is where we're going to get into a little bit more of the faith of people who follow Ondra as a deity. We have 2 in-game lore books that you can use to look at Ondra. One is the Selected Correspondences of Giftbringer Aiden, and the other is the Gift Bearer's Pilgrimage. Both of these books are about the deity Ondra. So the first one we're going to go through is Selected Correspondences of Giftbringer Aiden. Sing, O ocean waves, of Ondra's sorrow, of her unrequited love for the unattainable moon. Sing of the ocean's sorrow, so that we may forget our own. Each day the tides reenact Ondra's longing for the great moon. The waters reach out at high tide, yearning for the heavenly body, only to slump into low tide when the moon proves unattainable. This first paragraph discusses some of the mythology behind Ondra, about how she loves the moon and she wants to reach it, but she can't, and so we have Ondra's sorrow. And the rising and lowering of the tide is symbolic to those who follow Ondra in a religious sense. It reenacts that event, I guess you could call it, in their minds, which is an important thing for followers of the god of sorrow to keep in mind. You asked me once why I loved Ondra so dearly, how I could go from a life on dry land to being a devotee of the goddess of the oceans. I sing of the ocean's sorrow so that I may forget my own. It is Ondra's message that speaks to my heart. I have devoted my life to helping others discard painful memories, for that is the gift Ondra gave me. When I lost my young daughter, my wife and I were inconsolable until a gift bearer offered to take my toddler's toys and cast them into the deepest waters. So here we have basically the short version of a testimony from someone who is now an Ondrite. And at first glance, it seems pretty odd. Like, how could someone who sings of the sorrow of their god have joy or have purpose? It sounds almost like these people are focusing so much on Ondra and this sorrow, at least in these paragraphs here, and that it somehow seems to give them meaning and purpose. And that sounds backwards at first. But I think that if for a lot of these people, having a deity that they believe in that experiences sorrow makes them, I would imagine, feel a little more personable. I think sometimes, and especially obviously this is all in-game mythologies and stuff like that, but the idea of a god can be pretty distant. People would think of a deity up in some ethereal realm somewhere looking down on you, and they're just so distant from you. And a lot of these relationships that the followers have to their gods is one of piety and one of just constant sacrifice or whatever you have. You understand what I'm saying? Like, there's a lot of different relationships people have with gods in epic fantasy games like this or in stories like this. And I think the reason that Obsidian can justify that people would look at Ondra being a sorrowful god and have them connect with that is because it makes Ondra seem a little bit more like an actual person, you know? Like, oh, my god is also sad. And it in a way, it justifies my sadness. It makes me feel not alone in my sadness. It makes me feel like, well, if my god can be sad, then it's not odd that I am also sad. You know, it might make these people feel less alone. And this man, Aiden, he specifically speaks of one moment where a follower of Ondra, a gift bringer, came and took all of his lost daughter's toys and threw them in the sea, which sounds like a really weird thing to do. But I get that, right? That the memories that you hold on to these items and the reminders that they are constantly in the home. And it's not something that you yourself might be able to just pick up and throw away, but having someone come in and with your permission help you move through this grief is really impactful. Clearly, it would be impactful to Aiden because he ended up devoting his life to becoming a gift bearer. The last paragraph of this book. Truth be told, I and the other gift bearers I know have never even spoken to Ondra. She is largely silent, and when she does, quote-unquote, speak, she uses floods and tidal waves instead of words. But we sing of the ocean's sorrow so that others may forget theirs. Ondra's story, the story of desire unanswered, actually matters to people like you and me. Magrin cannot steer you to victory over sadness. Hylia cannot force joy down a crying throat. Only Ondra can give us the strength to persevere when life seems without worth. And that is the answer to your question regarding why I love my goddess so dearly. And so in this closing paragraph, it looks like Aiden is talking about how the god of sorrow connects with him. You know, he brings up a couple other gods to show how they can't satisfy what he needs as a person at certain points, right? Like Magrin, goddess of fire and war, cannot steer you to victory over sadness, right? She can steer you to victory over battle. She can make you victorious in a fight against your foes. But when you're battling with your own emotions and your own sadness, Magrin can't help you there. And Hylia, she is a goddess of joy. She can't force joy down your throat when you are crying constantly. And Ondra is the only one that, at least according to Aiden, relates, gives you strength to persevere when you are feeling sad. And that's why he loves his god, because she gives him the strength to persevere through that sadness and that sorrow. The second book that we could consider scripture for Ondra is called The Gift Bearer's Pilgrimage. A gift bearer of Ondra is traveling along the road when she meets a man in tears holding a scrap of parchment. "Why do you weep?" asks the gift bearer. "I hold here a letter from my wife. I tried to be a good husband, but the letter says that I was not, and that she has gone to seek the company of a better man. Now this is all that remains of her." "Give the letter to me, then," says the gift bearer. "For once you have forgotten the letter, your wife can cause you no further pain." The man gives her the letter and finds his tears have dried up. He thanks the gift bearer and leaves at peace. The gift bearer continues on, contemplating the man's story, but does not get far before she encounters an old woman in tears holding a string of beads. "Why do you weep?" asks the gift bearer. "I hold here a string of beads that counted the years of my daughter's life. Sickness took her while I was still a child, and she was denied the joys of a full life, and I the joys of a mother. This is all that remains of her." "Give me the beads, then," says the gift bearer, "for once you have forgotten the beads, your daughter can truly rest." The old woman gives her the beads and finds her grief no longer gnaws at her soul. She thanks the gift bearer and leaves at peace. Thinking on the woman's pain, the gift bearer follows the road until she reaches the sea. In her hands she carries the letter and the beads. They are light in her hands but heavy upon her heart, and she is crying. She prays to Ondra to allow the objects to be forgotten and casts them into the water. And yet, long after they have sunk beneath the waves, the gift-bearer finds herself still weeping. "Merciful Ondra," pleads the gift-bearer, "in your service I have helped people forget their troubles, yet though I pass them on to you, I feel them still as though they were mine. How can this be?" The gift-bearer listens to the wisdom of the crashing waves until she understands. To feel the troubles of others in your soul is a burden itself. However, she has no token to give Ondra to bear it away, for the troubles are not hers to forget. "I give myself to you, then," says the gift-bearer. "For once I am in your care, no memory may haunt me." And with that, the tide comes forth and embraces the gift-bearer, and when it ebbs, she is gone. And so this is clearly a story recounting one gift-bearer's pilgrimage, where a gift-bearer runs into two people on her travels and essentially takes things from them to help them move on with their grief. And it's an interesting little book to read. Like in the first instance, when the gift bearer takes the letter from the person, and the gift bearer remarks, "Now your wife can cause you no further pain." It is true in a lot of ways. There's a lot of emotional baggage that people can hold on to, and they attach those to the items as well. And it serve as reminders for some of this emotional pain. So as long as this man has this note in his hands, in a weird sort of way, his former wife is still causing him pain. She is actively still causing this man pain as long as he holds onto this note. But it's not something he can just easily toss aside. And then with the old woman who had the beads that, served as a reminder of her daughter, it's not that her daughter is, like in the first instance where there was a note that was hurtful. These beads are not anything malicious. There was nothing negative about these beads, but they were a reminder of this really tragic moment in this life. And so giving something like that up, that's a little different than giving up this note that's actively causing you pain. But the gifter remarks saying, once you have forgotten the beads, your daughter can truly rest. Now, obviously, the daughter can rest regardless, in normal life. I don't know if there's anything special going on in the world of Eora where someone's sorrow is tying a soul to the world or something like that, which maybe that could happen, actually. But anyways, that's a side note. The gift bearer taking these beads helps the daughter rest in the mind of the mother, right? So as long as this old woman is constantly thinking about her daughter, then her daughter's in a way never truly rests. At least this abstract version of her daughter never rests, and it causes this old woman much grief and sorrow. So the gift bearer takes these items and goes to the ocean, but finds that she herself is now bearing the emotional weight of a lot of these things. And by giving herself to Ondra, is she finally feel that freedom. So it's an interesting little piece of scripture to go through. I always find these religious-y books in Pillars of Eternity very interesting. I myself, being a faith-based man, loved looking at how this kind of thing is laid out and where people who follow this could maybe pull meaning out and apply it to their lives. The people at Obsidian that are doing the writing for this game, I love it. And this is just one example of, I think, depth of writing and an understanding of at least some of the human condition. Am I saying it's a PhD level, top tier analysis of the human psyche or sociology or anything like that? No, I'm not. But there's some humanity to the way that they write, and I love that. I find people can connect to ideas that are in these games. Before we begin to close out the episode, talk about Ondra possibly in Avowed, I want to just look at a couple of items that we see in the Pillars of Eternity games where the item descriptions give some lore about Ondra or her followers. The first one is a quest item called Ondra's Witness, which you find in the Rising Tide quests for White March Part 2. This is the description that we have for Ondra's Witness, the item. The ritual of sprinkling holy water is one of the most important traditions in the Ondraite Church. For Ondra's followers, it signifies not only a sanctifying of the church, but the actual presence of the Lady of Lament herself. All Ondraite holy water comes from the ocean, and those who convey the water from the sea to the church on pilgrimage are held in great esteem among Ondraite faithful. So far in the first half of this description, it's a pretty straightforward kind of religious idea that you have a church dedicated to Ondra. You want to, in a sense, sanctify or bless the church, so you sprinkle holy water. And in this case, holy water would be any water from the ocean. And there are specific people who travel back and forth from the ocean to this church, or whatever church this is, carrying this water. So it's almost like the opposite, in a weird way, of a gift bearer, where a gift bearer goes to a person, takes stuff, brings it to the ocean, throws it in the ocean. These people go to the ocean, take the ocean water, and bring it back to the church so that they can sanctify the church by sprinkling water around. The rest of the description goes as follows. This aspergillum, I'm not sure what that is, Aspergillum, takes the traditional shape of a spherical vessel set at the end of a long handle, with holes bored into the top to allow water to flow outward when the item is flicked. More uniquely, the shaft has been carved to look as though barnacles cling to it, and the vessel at the end has been made to resemble the moon Belafa. Salt appears to have been crusted in long wisps that wisp around the object. So the last half of this is just a description of what this thing physically actually looks like and how it resembles Ondra in different ways. And also its functionality. Like, there's water in this vessel, but only when you flick this staff does the water come out? Which, if you're sprinkling water and not pouring water on your church, I guess that would be pretty useful function to have. I want to close the episode off with asking, what connection could Ondra have to the game of Avowed as it undergoes development? Now, certainly there might be nothing that actually does come about in the game of Avowed with Ondra. Avowed so far, from what we know, hopefully on June 12th, if you watch the Xbox Bethesda showcase, maybe we'll see some gameplay, maybe we'll see something. But from what we have now, which is just a reveal trailer, it seems to be a lot more focused on Woodica, which is pretty typical of the Pillars of Eternity games as well. It's not so much a focus on Ondra. And realistically, there might be nothing. There might be no DLCs focusing on Ondra. There might not even be a side quest focusing on Ondra. I'd like to think that that's not true. I'd like to think that over at Obsidian, they're developing content that kind of touches on a lot of different aspects of the lore. But realistically, you can only make so much of a video game, and you can only make so many side quests, and you want to make sure that you're doing quality over quantity. At least that's how I feel Obsidian like to do things. So there might be nothing. But I think that there's a decent amount of justification for why we could see Ondra in Avowed. If Avowed is taking place in the Living Lands, as it is rumored to be taking place, the Living Lands, as we've discussed before, is a location in the world of Eora. It's actually its own region, and there's not a lot known about it because it's one of the newer areas of the world being explored. It's kind of a frontier, a place for people to explore. It's wild, it's dangerous. There's a lot going on there, but people have been there before, and there is a lot of mystery and intrigue in the Living Lands. And whenever you have mystery and intrigue, you might have things like ancient secrets. And anywhere you have ancient secrets, you might have Ondra being involved in some way, shape, or form. Yes, she is normally associated with the ocean, so depending on whether or not we're close to the ocean, might influence whether we see a lot of Ondra or Ngati culture. But as for Ondra herself and her influences, if there are any ancient secrets held in the Living Lands, we might see Ondra's fingerprints all over it, trying to make sure everything is staying forgotten. So there is a chance that Ondra could be involved in Avowed in some way, shape, or form. As well, there might just be the chance for your player to actually be a follower of Ondra. Like perhaps you can play a priest class, or perhaps you can choose factions to ally with. Maybe there'll be side quests for different groups of people that we can gain their favor. Maybe perhaps we help out a church, or maybe you even get to help a gift bearer. You're traveling along a road and you see someone injured and they're carrying a sack full of things, and they're like, I'm a gift bearer with Ondra's church and I need to bring these things to the ocean. It's really important so these people can move on, but I'm not able to complete the journey because of an injury I've had. Will you finish the journey for me, right? And then that will kind of bring into play a moral decision of like, okay, do you help this gift bearer out and actually go throw these items into the ocean, or do you say you'll do it and then just pocket them all for yourselves? I know a lot of us gamers will probably just pocket a lot of the items for ourselves, but knowing Obsidian, they'll probably have some sort of consequence down the road for you to do that. Well, I don't know, that or they won't. Maybe they'll just be like, and you get away with it scot-free, because sometimes that happens in life, right? Anyway, so there's a lot of ways that Ondra could be involved, or Ondra followers could be involved, and I'm excited to see what Obsidian might do. I would love an Ondra-themed DLC, but I'm sure one of them probably forgot to do it by now. That's a little joke. I'm sorry. I can do better than that. Anyways, that's all I have to talk about for Ondra today. Thank you guys so much for joining me on this longer episode where we took a deeper dive for one of the deities in the world of Eora. I really miss doing episodes like this. It takes a little more work, obviously, and a lot more time, but it's been nice to get into it. Thanks, everybody who's been listening to the show religiously, no pun intended, because this is a God episode. Thank you for listening to the show and being patient with me as I've been kind of going through this transition into fatherhood. It's been super fun. My son is starting to get to the stage now where he'll react to things I do, so I was just finally the other day able to reliably make him laugh, and it has filled my heart with joy. So it's getting more and more joyful every day. But anyways, this isn't a podcast about my fatherhood. Thanks for putting up with that. If you would like to reach out to me to offer a criticism or a praise, then you can email me, worldofaora@gmail.com, or you can follow me on Twitter @worldofaora. I post whenever a update is going on with the show, or whenever an episode is out, I post on Twitter. And I like to reach out to people on Twitter and have conversations on there as well through email. I have email chains going back and forth with some fans from earlier on in the show. So if you want to get a conversation started, you want to suggest show topics, want to ask a question, or point out an inconsistency in something I've done, please do. I love having conversations with you guys. Other than that, I think that's it for the episode. Thanks everyone for joining in with me today. I'm your host, Eric, aka Gingerino, and I'll see you guys next time.